This video was made possible thanks to my amazing patrons at patreon.com/magicalhacker. If you're not a patron and you would like me to make a video for you each month using your decks, become a patron today. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavony Township, the show where it's not about me and my decks, it is about you and your decks. Whether you're a content creator that I'm collaborating with, whether you're someone that's won one of my giveaways, or whether you're a patron of mine at patreon.com/magicalhacker, where I give out a Patreon perk every month, including deck doctors, deck gameplay, deck images, there's lots of stuff there, so make sure you check that out if you haven't already looked there. For today's episode, we've got Jeff Mobley's Sidisi Brood Tyrant deck, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. If I'm not, please let me know, because I don't want to be doing that. But we got Jeff's Sidisi deck, and if you haven't seen Sidisi before, here's the commander. So 4 mana for a legendary 3/3 Naga Shaman that says whenever Sidisi Brood Tyrant enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 3 cards. Whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from your library, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So with Sidisi, you're having this deck where you're trying to actually mill yourself, get a bunch of creatures into your graveyard, produce tokens, and then at some point win the game. That's kind of the way it works. So this entire deck is based around probably putting stuff into the graveyard and getting them back out. So let's go ahead, jump right in as we always do. Start by moving all the cards into one or two categories, or rather 1 or 2 piles. That way we can then take those cards and just take a look to see what they're forming. You know, what's the entire game plan of the deck. Let's go ahead and move a few cards down here too. All right, so we've got. We're gonna start off here with Finale of Eternity. So this is an X drop. This is an X spell. This is used mostly for destroying creatures. You have to pay X, where the X is the toughness. So in a little bit of a sense, it's almost like you can deal up to 3 target creatures X damage, but it's a black spell, so it's not actually going to be using damage. The benefit here, though, is if you're playing it for 12 or more, you get to actually return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that's definitely going to be a Reanimator card. We can go ahead and start off by making a category here of Reanimator cards. We can start talking about 2 cards we want to reanimate. So here, Stormtide Leviathan's a great example. Terracodon is another fantastic inclusion. Sheoldred, Avenger of Zendikar. All of these cards are going to be fantastic to reanimate. So this one here, this is an Aftermath card. It allows you to get some extra versatility, extra benefit from putting cards into your graveyard. So you put a bunch of cards into your graveyard, then you can cast them if they've got Aftermath or Flashback or something like that. So this one I like for the card draw aspect. Tassiger, this one's kind of cool for recursion. We'll go ahead and put that in a recursion pile. Champion, this is another Reanimator effect. We're going to go ahead and put that there. And we will have to keep in mind with the, when we're looking at the categories, sometimes we will have cards that are going to be in other categories, and yet they're also cards we want to reanimate. So that we'll keep in mind for sure. Grave Titan, another great example of a card you'd like to reanimate. Prime Speaker Zagana, I'm going to put that into the card draw section. Again, if it does card draw, I do want to at least take a look and see that. Sheoldred here kind of counts as both. I'm going to go ahead and move that to the Reanimator section, and we'll keep in mind that it's got both here. The Muldrotha is definitely more. Well, I guess you could also reanimate this, but it's recursion. Yeah. So why don't we do this? We're gonna put a category here of things that aren't doing something every deck would like to do, like spot removal, which I guess Noxious. Well, no. Let's do this: card draw, ramp, and recursion, and reanimation. If it doesn't do any of those 4 things, but it's a big creature, we'll put it into this pile. Otherwise, we'll put it into other piles here. Liliana, Death's Majesty. This is another source of reanimation. Living Death, a fantastic, like a very famous card for reanimating stuff. Sir Conrad. This one's pretty cool. You can at least mill yourself. You can also mill opponents if you'd like. Let me think about this one here. I guess in a way this is kind of like a Blood Artist effect. It just goes really well with milling. So let's put here like a self-mill matters type of category. So if you're self-milling, this category here likes you when you do that. So I guess this would, dredge counts as something that wants to be used for milling, so for self-milling. So we'll put another category here for self-mill. This one cares about cards being milled. Same thing with the spiders spawning. Grimgrin, this one, I mean, it's 5 mana. It's not like you won't actually cheat it out with a Living Death, because you're paying 5 mana for it anyways, or with the Liliana's Death's Majesty. So I think at 5 mana we can kind of cut off the reanimation effect. So let me take a look here. We've got Grimgrin. Where would this fit into the in the deck? It's a sack outlet. Sack outlet might be important here. So let's make a category for sack outlets. Havengul Lich definitely counts as recursion. Wonder, this one's going to be here the self-mills matter. Because if you mill the Wonder, suddenly all your creatures get flying. Not bad at all. We've got here Vizier of Many Faces. This has Embalm, so I'm going to put that into that same category. Diabolic Servitude is reanimation. Same thing with the Dread Return. Endless Ranks of the Dead. This is creating a lot of zombie tokens. We'll put that into one category here. If we're playing a lot of zombie makers, we can maybe even do some zombie shenanigans in this deck too. Next, we've got the Liliana Untouched by Death. What does this one do? Mill 3 cards. So this is self-mill. We can put that there. Ravenous Chupacabra. That is going to be... I suppose this was going to be maybe like in the spot removal section. I guess 4 mana is fine. I usually like having my spot removal be instant speed, but when we're playing a deck like this that wants to have a lot of creatures, sometimes that's easier said than done. So let's keep going though, and we do need to make some more piles here because I'm noticing we got next one, Farhaven Elf. That is ramp, so we gotta make a spot here for ramp. Death Baron, yeah, we do actually have some zombie shenanigans here in the deck, some zombie tribal stuff, giving zombies +1/+1 and Death Touch. Not bad. Turns those 2/2s into 3/3s. That is not bad at all. Reanimation here from the Victimize. Lord of the Accursed, that's going to be another zombie. Scab Ruinator, this is going to be another like self-mill advantage. Same thing with the Laboratory Maniac. Hostage Taker, I like this for spot removal. We'll put that over there. World Shaper, this is definitely going to be ramp. Whip of Erebos, in a way that's kind of like Reanimator, so I'll go ahead and put that there. Undead War Chief is Zombie Matters. Same thing with the Risen Executioner. Preordained, that's going to be a cantrip, so we'll make another category for that. Carrion Feeder, that's going to be a sack outlet. We'll put that with Grimgrin. And Crypt Breaker, this is card draw, so we'll put that with the card draw effects. All right, let's keep going here. Got a lot of cool stuff. Not to the bone. This is going to be a way to gain life, so we can go ahead and put that into the category of, you know, milling matters. Croson Grip, that's definitely going to be spot removal here. Ramanov Excavator, this one's recursion, so we can go ahead and put that there. And, you know, I'm kind of thinking maybe that World Shaper counts as recursion too. But, you know, I think ramp is a little bit more important. We'll make sure that we keep that in the ramp section for right now. We've got the Reclamation Sage. That will be the spot removal. Skullwinder is recursion. Splinter Fright, that's going to be self-mill. We've got Eternal Witness for recursion. We've got Demir Doppelganger, which I would say this is recursion too. I mean, you can kind of recur other people's creatures, but, I mean, I like it. I think that's pretty good here. Journey to, what is this? Journey to Eternity? Yeah, that's going to be recursion. Nyx Weaver, I'm going to put this into the self-mill section. Sultai Charm, that's definitely spot removal. And continuing on here, Anime Dead, that's going to be reanimation. Zulaport Cutthroat. So this one, it works really well with sack outlets if you can sacrifice your whole board. We did have that Sir Conrad, but that counts for the self-milling. Like if you mill cards, Sir Conrad will trigger, whereas the Zulaport Cutthroat won't. So we'll put that into a new category here. Nether Trader, this is going to be a way that we can get back a single creature. I don't know how important that is. We'll come back to that one. We'll definitely come back to that one. Veteran Explorer, that one is ramp. It's a little weird, though, as ramp, because you're actually ramping everybody. You're not just ramping yourself. So Veteran Explorer, I like this card, though. Don't get me wrong. I like it. Veteran Explorer, when it dies, each player searches their library for up to 2 basic land cards. I have this in my Zakama deck, where you really just want to have lands. It doesn't matter if other people have lands, too. You just really want them yourself. We're going to go ahead and put the Steve in the same category here. Sakura Tri-Builder, classic card. Let's keep going down. I think we've got just a couple of cards left. Satyr Wayfinder, this is definitely going to be self-mill. We'll put that into the self-mill pile. Grizzly Salvage, same deal. Altar of Dementia, I'm actually going to put that into the ramp section because we are potentially being able to make enough creatures or tokens that we can sacrifice them for mana and ramp that way. So I kind of like that one. Yes, we could put it into the sack outlets, but I think ramp needs the help a little bit more here. So right off the bat, this is what I'm kind of noticing. We do have, a good number of creatures that we can reanimate, like the Champion, the Sheoldred are a few that are not in this category. We also have the Muldrotha, even Tassiger kind of counts. So we do have, I think, a good number of creatures to reanimate, but it's more so that we're trying to use Animate Dead to get value, not so much being able to get a big game-ending card onto the battlefield. If we were trying to do that, where we're trying to reanimate one big card onto the battlefield, I would be looking to add in Kokusho and add in the Gray Merchant of Asphodel, those types of cards, when you've got a bunch of reanimation, that can turn your Living Death into a game ender, no matter what your opponents get to. Like even if they get the scariest board state from that Living Death, you got a Gray Merchant of Asphodel coming down, that kills everybody. You got this. You maybe get like what's another example? You get the Coco Show, you get a Sack Outlet, and you get another way to reanimate something. Maybe you get the Champion of Stray Souls. That can end the game pretty easily if you can use this ability right away. So a lot of things can be done here where you can win the game immediately from a reanimation spell. There's a lot of reanimation here, which I think is important. I think that's definitely an important aspect. But I would say you want to try to balance out the number of reanimate effects, unless you're doing stuff like mass reanimation. So Living Death here as a good example. I would say you want to try to balance this number out with the number of creatures you can reanimate. And yes, with the 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5-ish cards we add in here, we can get up to 10. But that's still 3 more cards here in the reanimation section. So the question is, what do we want to add in? What do we want to drop? And how do we get there? So I think, I don't know if this is super obvious already, but Zulaport Cutthroat and Nether Trader are 2 cards I don't think are super necessary here in the deck. Nether Trader is just another way that we can get back a creature, a 1/1 Haste Shadow from our graveyard to the battlefield. I don't know if that's super necessary. Getting a 1/1 out there for free, or even just for 1 mana here from that ability, I mean, it could be good, but I just don't see that happening very often. If that were the case, then like why would Gravecrawler not be in here? I mean, our commander makes zombies. Gravecrawler can just come out for free. So I'm just not super enticed by the Nether Trader. Zulaport Cutthroat, I think we're in a position where if this was a good effect too, we want to have Blood Artist, we want to have all those other effects, and I'm not entirely sold on those actually being good. And the reason that I'm saying that here with the Zulaport Cutthroat is because you're making a lot of creatures, but if you're trying to do an aristocrat style deck, the deck would be really different. You wouldn't really be using a lot of this single targeted reanimation. You wouldn't be using a lot of these bigger creatures. So when it comes to all sorts of different things, there's specific things you want to keep in mind. And it might be that this deck is trying to kind of go in too many different directions all at once, which, some people like. Some people really enjoy that, and I can't blame people for doing that. That's definitely something that people enjoy doing for sure. So let's take a look here. I think it's fair to say Nether Trader and Zulaport Cutthroat can both go ahead and leave the deck. Especially, you've got effects like Zulaport Cutthroat. It doesn't actually care about your opponent's creatures dying. So if you have something like a Blood Artist, if an opponent has a lot of creatures as well and a board wipe happens, you can target it all at one player. That's a problem. Whereas the Zulaport Cutthroat, whenever your creatures die, you might be hurting your allies. So Zulaport Cutthroat might not be as good as the Blood Artist in certain situations. So Zulaport Cutthroat is one that I'm seeing currently, could be dropped. Same thing with the Nether Trader. Now, the zombies here, I understand where this is coming from, and I think it is going to be pretty helpful. If you're trying to pump up these zombies in order to win, though, you're in the perfect colors for other things as well. So you're in green. You've got effects kind of like Overrun, and this is not one that's usually run that much in Commander, but this is one of the classic effects, and so I always call them Overrun effects. But you've got stuff like this that can give a buff to your creatures and then give them trample, and those two effects in combination can turn a board state that doesn't look super threatening into a board state that can kill 1 or 2, maybe even 3 people all at once. Whereas the Diagraph Captain, it comes down and it makes your zombies bigger every turn. Maybe not that, it's going to be a little bit slower. You see what I'm saying? Like, you have to wait a few turns before you can get as much value out of it as you would get in Overrun. So that's kind of the idea here. Do we want to add these in? Do we want to keep these in? That's definitely up to Jeff. Like, if you want to trade these out for effects like Overrun, another example is obviously Craterhoof and the Infect one, Triumph of the Hordes. Those two are very, very well known, but there's plenty others as well. Let me see if I can remember some of the other ones. The one that I'm thinking of is the Return of the, and let me see if I can find it, because it should be, I know it doesn't give trample, but it gives that +3/+3, and you can even use it for card draw if you'd like. So I think that's always pretty cool. Return of the Wild Speaker. Here it is. So you can use this for giving your non-humans +3/+3 or drawing cards. So it doesn't get that trample that I think is actually pretty important. But with having this being an instant, you can wait to attack, see if there's enough blocks where you can kill somebody, and then go for the return and kill somebody kind of at instant speed. So that's kind of the benefit here. I think overall, what I'd like to do, if it were me personally, I'd be dropping all 6 of these to add those 6 cards in here. But with Jeff's deck being here, this is not like a bad inclusion. Like, these are not cards that I would say, hey, these are going to be bad in the deck. It's just, I know, kind of an upgrade path So I'll leave those in there. I'm not going to say that they're bad and they need to be taken out. Continuing on, though, let's take a look at some of these other effects. Now, Shieldred is a pretty expensive reanimation effect, which is not always great, but the fact that it's also a reanimatable creature makes it great. We've got the Finale of Eternity. This gets multiple creatures, which I think is worth having an expensive mana cost. Kind of the same thing with the Rise of the Dark Realms. Champion, another creature that we can reanimate. Ever After gets 2 creatures. Liliana, Death's Majesty, is a 5-drop that reanimates. Potentially can reanimate twice, though, so that's kind of one benefit here. It also counts for the self-mill, which is not bad. Living Death gets multiple things. So the first thing that we find that can only get 1 creature is Diabolic Servitude, and really, it can get multiple creatures. Same thing with the Dread Return. By the time we get down to Victimize, which is also 2 creatures, we've got Whip of Erebos. This one is quite a lot of mana. It gives creatures lifelink, so if life gain is something important to you, then Whip of Erebos will be good. But in a lot of situations, I felt that Whip of Erebos, it's just so much mana to reanimate something, and you lose that creature. You can't get it anymore. When you're playing a reanimation deck, exiling your own creatures from your graveyard can really put you in a position where you just don't have enough creatures to reanimate out to win the game from a Living Death. So, Whip of Erebos is kind of an iffy card. Journey to Eternity I kind of like. I don't usually play it very often, but being able to have that repeatable source of reanimation is not bad at all. We've got the Animate Dead in here as well. So with those cards in here, again, including some of the ones that we moved into the reanimatable pile, I think there are plenty of cards here that we can use, but there are a few sources of upgrades that we can do. So I would start, I would start off by taking out the cards that would exile your creatures. So here we've got Diabolic Servitude and Whip of Erebos. Again, if that lifelink is important to you, that is something you'll want to keep. But we can take those 2 out and put 2 of my favorite reanimation spells in here as well. The first one I like a lot is Necromancy. So Necromancy, the benefit here, it is 3 mana, but you can do it at instant speed. And you know what, I'm kind of noticing here, there's not really anything else that's 1 spell for 3 mana reanimate. So maybe Necromancy is not a good example. Maybe what we want to do is Life and Death. So Life and Death is a split card. One half of it is very similar to another card, which I'm going to suggest right afterwards. And so let's go ahead and find Life and Death. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, this pops up a lot of different things. Here's Life and Death. So, and I'll put that into this pile over here. Life and Death says, on one half of it, return target creature card here on the Death side. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. If you know the card Reanimate, it is very similar to that one. The difference here is that it costs 2 mana, and it can only target creatures from your graveyard. But Reanimate is such a powerful effect, I feel like I'm always okay having another effect in the deck, even when it's a little bit more mana and limited. You can't put it from anybody's graveyard. So these 2 effects I actually really like. Now you can be losing a lot of life from a Reanimate. Like let's say you're targeting an Avenger of Zendikar, losing 7 life for that can be kind of devastating. But paying for 1 mana to get an Avenger means that you can do so much during the rest of your turn. You can do a ton of other things here. So Reanimate is another option that we can actually use to make the deck a little bit stronger. Is the way I'm seeing it. All right, so we've got Nether Trader, Zulaport Cutthroat, Whip of Erebos, and Diabolic Servitude so far on our drop list, adding in 2 cards over here. Now that's kind of just the upgrading path for a few reanimation spells. In terms of things that we would like to reanimate, there are a few cards that I'm thinking of that can be pretty good. I'd like to take a look first at my Jund Reanimator deck, because that's kind of similar to this Sidisi deck, where it's trying to self-mill cards, trying to self-mill big, fat creatures, and then get them back to the battlefield and give them haste so they can attack right away. So I'm going to take a look here at my Zero Arian deck in just a second, just to see if there's any other big creatures we want to add in. Besides that, though, a couple of categories I think I would like to beef up is the card draw. I would like to see at least maybe 4 more cards used for card draw. Yes, I know we've got self-mill in the deck, and with all this reanimation, it almost feels like we have access to more cards than everybody else. But I think it is still important to have access to more reanimation spells as well. So that's one benefit here. After that, I think the next category I'd like to see some additions is going to be the ramp section. I think ramp doesn't really have a whole lot here that we can use very efficiently. And I'd like to add maybe just 2 more effects of ramp. So 4 card draw, 2 ramp, things that I think we can drop. Yeah, it's a tough one. I really feel like when we're going for the self-mill, I would like to see effects that are just not going to be super expensive. So Grizzly Salvage, Satyr Wayfinder, Nyx Weaver, Splinter of Right, these are great, you know. But these last 2 cards, the Golgari Grave Troll and the Liliana Untouched by Death, these 2 are a little bit iffy. So with the Liliana, we can use this to mill cards, make each opponent lose 2 life and gain 2 life. We can use Liliana to destroy a creature if we've got enough zombies out in the battlefield, and we can also use it to cast zombies from our graveyard. Seems like a great card for this deck, but what I would say is you can probably find something that's going to be even better for the self-mill. You already have plenty of spot removal, and that last ability of casting zombies from our graveyard, look how much recursion we've got. We've got 7 cards of recursion, and we have got the Liliana here just in the self-mill pile. So here's what I would do. I would actually add in Mesmeric Orb. And this is a card that will mill everybody, not just you. But it will mill everybody so fast that you both simultaneously will threaten killing everybody through mill, and you will enable your own mill a lot. So here's Mesmeric Orb, 2 mana for an artifact that says whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. So imagine you get this down on turn 2. Turn 3, you mill 2 cards. And you tap out maybe 3 lands, you play something else. Turn 4, you mill 3 cards. So every turn, you're milling at least 3-4 cards, potentially like 10 cards a turn with Mesmeric Orb, and your opponents are doing the same thing. Like, I've seen Mesmeric Orb be really good in a deck like this, so I don't mind adding in the Mesmeric Orb and dropping the Liliana, especially that the Liliana, being a Planeswalker, people can attack her. And when you've got 3 opponents, like, it's very hard to get a Planeswalker out on the battlefield and keep it around unless you've got a million of them. If you've got a million of them, that's a different story. But with the Liliana, it might just be hard to keep her around. And even if you do keep her around, I mean, that mill is going to be better from the Mesmeric Orb. You've already got plenty of spot removal. And casting zombies from our graveyard is not super necessary here when we've got so much recursion. So I don't mind doing the 1-for-1 trade here for the Liliana for the Mesmeric Orb. All right, let's keep going along here. Yeah, the rest of these things, I like everything else. Even the Golgari Grave Troll, I know I mentioned that this was 5 mana, but let's say you happen to mill it, you get a free Dredge 6 next time you would draw a card. And you don't even have to cast this out. Sometimes you can just discard it to something like a Crypt Breaker. You discard that card, make a zombie token, and you can keep dredging it along. Not bad at all. So yeah, I think we can keep the Golgari Grave Troll in here. In terms of the things that care about self-mill, I really like a lot of these cards. The Scab Ruinator is kind of annoying because it's a 5/6 flyer that you can keep recasting from your graveyard. The downside here is that you have to exile creatures from your graveyard, and I think this kind of eats at what we actually need. So one of the resources in this deck is going to be having a lot of creature cards in the graveyard that we can abuse with the rest of this deck. Scab Ruinator takes away that resource. So is that worth having a 5/6 flyer? Well, not entirely. Is it worth having a 5/6 flyer they can recast over and over? Maybe, but I'm gonna kind of lean it towards the side of no. I don't think that's actually super necessary in a deck like this. So I'm going to move this Scab Ruinator here to the no pile. And I know what you're thinking, like, we are already super low on blue cards. Don't we want to add more blue cards in? Well, don't you worry. We're going to be adding in card draw, and of course, that's going to be a lot of blue cards there. Speaking of blue cards, we've got Preordained in the deck, just a single copy. It allows you to scry through, then draw a card. Now, I know a lot of people really like cantrip effects that allow you to kind of manipulate the top cards of your deck and then draw a card. And Preordained is no exception to this rule. People like playing Preordained, Brainstorm, stuff like this in Commander. Their mentality is, you know, I can just pay 1 mana and use 1 card, it replaces itself, and I get a lot more consistency in the deck. Well, here's the difference. In a 60-card format, yes, Preordained is amazing. You get 4 copies of it, and you get to look through, let's see, here, you have Scry 2, then draw a card. So that's at most 3 cards. That is 1/20th of your deck in a 60-card format, and when you've got decks that are potentially just 4-ofs all over, that's like 1/5 of all your options. Whereas in Commander, you're looking at 3 cards. That is, let's say you've drawn 7 cards for your opening hand. You play the Preordained. You're looking at a pile of at most, let's see, 92 cards. So you're looking at 3 out of 92 cards, and it's singleton. You're really not going to be increasing consistency by enough to warrant having a card that will not trigger the Sidisi, or even worse, just not allow you to play an answer that you really need. When you've got tutors in a deck, or in this situation, you've got a lot of mill and self-recursion, you want to have more options in your graveyard. You're never going to be wanting to get a Preordained out of the graveyard over something that's actually an important card for the deck. So that's where I'm seeing Preordained. That's where I see cantrips. It's not that they're too small of effect, although that is also true. It's more that they don't increase consistency enough to warrant using the resource of the specific card slot for that card. So that's where I'm seeing Preordained here. Especially if we're increasing the card draw, like I don't mind dropping the Preordained to add in, for example, a Rhystic Study or something. That usually is pretty good. So right now we've got room for those 4 card draw, but we need to drop 2 more cards in order to have enough for our 2 ramp spells that we would like to add in. So let's see. I like the ramp. We'll definitely need to add more ramp in here. I like the spot removal. We've got Corrosive Grip and Sultai Charm for the instant speed stuff, and I usually like playing 4 instants for my spot recursion or spot removal rather. But with this being a creature heavy deck due to the commander, I don't mind having these types of cards where you can use them over and over to remove cards. Not what I would do personally, but I think that's reasonable and totally doable in a deck like this. All right, next one here. I like this pile. The section here of, this is a tough one. The section here of sack outlets. On one hand, I do like it, but on one hand, I'm a little bit kind of conflicted. We're trying to self-mill, we're trying to reanimate. Sack outlets do sometimes play an important role in that, where if we want to get an ability multiple times, so for example, the Ravenous Chupacabra. Let's say we want to be able to destroy something again. What we could do is sacrifice it and then reanimate it. But the question is, are these worth the spot for those cards? And so I think that's going to be an important question to ask here. We've got Grimgrin, which also has the additional benefit of being a source of spot removal. We can destroy creatures when it attacks. And then Carrion Feeder, I like it because if you've got enough creatures out there, you attack with a Carrion Feeder. Somebody says, I can take the 1 damage, it's no big deal. And then you can maybe even surprise, make even more creatures, sacrifice them all, and make Carrion into a lethal attacker. That's not something that happens too often, but that is something that's potentially possible here. So I do like these 2. I don't think we need to add any more, but I think this is going to be an important role here. So we already talked about this category. This category here is a little interesting. And actually, I'm taking a look here at the Tasker. We can move the Tasker over to this section. Yeah, so anyways, this category is a little bit interesting. A lot of cards in here are great. Like, you've got Kessig Cage Breakers, which I don't see enough often in Commander, actually. I don't see it often enough in Commander, and it's actually pretty good. You get to create tokens that are tapped and attacking if you're doing a lot of self-mill and you haven't have a lot of creatures. Same thing with the Spider Spawning, not to mention it's got flashback so you can do it again. And obviously it doesn't create attackers, but it's still good. You get to create a lot of tokens from the Spider Spawning. So I like both of those cards. Wonder is a card that I've seen many times and I think is pretty good. And normally I'm not a huge fan of clone effects, but the Vizier of Many Faces I actually think is pretty good here. You can use this with the Embalm ability and copy something that your opponents have or that you have that you need in a moment. So it's very versatile in that way. And I like Vizier here. The one I'm not a huge fan of is Not to the Bone. And the reason I'm not a huge fan of it is because the only thing it can do is gain you life. And in a format where commanders can deal commander damage, people are using infinite combos, sometimes people are winning with alternate win conditions like Laboratory Maniac, there's a lot of games where life gain's not going to save you, right? So this is one of those effects that I think we can actually drop it here if we replace it with something that's going to help us win either more quickly or win more often. And I think that's what we'll be doing with the card draw and with the ramp. I think we'll definitely be able to do that. Now, you might be wondering, what are we ramping into? What are we drawing into? Why are those so important here? Well, with every deck, the more you can do what the deck wants, the better off the deck will be. The deck will be successful if it can cast its things, and it can cast more things than its opponent. That's kind of a simplistic way to look at Commander, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. And because of that, I think having that card draw where you can use it in order to draw more cards allows you to answer one part of that equation, where you've got more cards to cast than your opponents. The other question to answer is, how do you actually cast them? And that is going to be answered with ramp. So if you're drawing and ramping efficiently in your decks, you can use that advantage to do basically to get more turns of your deck. You can just keep getting more turns of it. And unlike extra turn effects, which cost like usually 5 mana or more, you can keep doing what you're doing per your turns. If you get down the ramp, the card draw early on in the game, you can kind of do what you want to do late game and just keep having extra turns for free value off of your ramp and card draw. So yeah, that's something I definitely want to add into this pile. These cards I do like. I don't actually get to see the feed mouth to feed that often, but I do like it here. I think this is going to be pretty good because we're going to be creating a lot of creatures with power 3 or greater, and that might be one reason why we want to play all these zombie lords, is so that this back half, the feed, the aftermath, will actually work with all the tokens that Sidisi makes. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. I do like the reanimation. I definitely want to take a look to see if I can find more cards for reanimating in a deck like this. I'm definitely going to be taking a look at my Zero Arian deck. And then after that, we're kind of back to where we started. Now, the only one here in this pile that I'm not a huge fan of is the Endless Rank. I know it can create a lot of tokens, but we're not really set up very easily to win with tokens. Yes, we have a lot of lords, but those lords turning the endless rank into creating a lot of tokens, not necessarily going to be an effect that's going to jive really well with the rest of this deck. You get an endless rank in your hand, and you've got, let's say, all of these two, like you've got cards from these 3 piles right here. You know, what is that going to do with the endless rank of the dead? It's not going to do a lot. You really have to have one of these 5 cards. Maybe the Crypt Breaker counts as well. But you really have to have a specific card on the battlefield for the endless rank to be something you can abuse. So I think here we can actually drop the endless rank of the dead. That's something that I think is not going to be missed terribly much, especially if you're doing a lot of card draw and a lot of ramp. You can get some of this other stuff going much more easily. Imagine, for example, you get card draw and ramp so that you get more of this effect. You get that Mesmeric Orb. You get to mill yourself more cards. Creating more tokens with Sidisi could be even more tokens you'd be creating than with Endless Rank of the Dead. So that's one way to kind of view it here. And that's not just what it can do. It can do beyond that. It can also help you find these effects, and you can put big creatures into your graveyard and then reanimate them and attack with them and kill people that way. So there's a lot of different things you can do here in a deck like this. And Endless Rank here, I think, could be upgraded to card draw and ramp. So right now we've got room for 6 more cards. That's exactly the number of cards we were talking about adding in. We'll see if there's any big creatures we want to add in to the big creature pile. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and add in 4 card draw and 2 ramp just to get these 2 piles up to 7 each. So right now we're here at 3 draw and 5 ramp. 5 ramp. So we want to get those up to at least 7. Personally, I like having 9. But, you know, being two cards below that, not horrible. And I think that's totally reasonable here. One thing I do want to mention, kind of in the last thing I want to mention here. When I built my Zero Aryan deck, because there were 2 piles of cards that really there needed to be a ton of those effects, I didn't have a lot of room for other effects that weren't as necessary. I basically had to put in self-mill, reanimation, and things to reanimate, and then the other normal categories: card draw, ramp, board wipes, spot removal, and then that was it. You know, that was the whole deck. I didn't have room to put in sack outlets. I didn't have room to put in recursion, other than, you know, reanimating effects. I didn't have room to be playing stuff that will, you know, get benefits from putting stuff into the graveyard. So that's kind of a little bit of something that works with this style of deck. When you've got a deck like this, the problem is that you're really, really strapped for slots. So every slot has to count, and that's true for every deck, but more so this than I think other themes, because there are just so many effects you want to be consistent in. Because if you don't have this big creature in the graveyard, these are not going to be as good. And if you don't have these, having these in the deck are just going to be dead cards in your hand. So it's like they depend on the consistency of each other to work. So that's kind of the issue here. But it's not an issue. I kind of like it. I think it's going to be good. So let's go ahead and take a look here at a few cards. I have Scryfall open. Normally I like to use Scryfall, but for whatever reason this time we're just going to be doing a lot more of other things. So I think what I like to do here, start off with some card draw steady. I personally like that, especially if you're playing in Commander where there's a lot of longer games going to like turn 10, turn 11. Card draw, I think, will in the steady category is going to be a lot more effective than burst for most decks. Certainly there are exceptions, but I think more often than not it's going to be the steady options that are better. And then obviously the ramp we talked about before, needing those here. And then we're going to go and open up the Zero Aryan deck. Now I do have red in this deck rather than blue, but black and green are kind of the core to this deck anyway, so that should be pretty good for us. After we look at this, we can take a look at my Braids deck, which is also another deck having a lot of big blue creatures. See if there's anything there that we want to add in. We won't be able to get like the Dimir, the Sultai, or the Simic big creatures, you know, that would potentially be possible to add into this deck, but I think it's going to be good nonetheless. So we've got a Tali, Green Ward and Murasa. I mean, we've got enough recursion. We don't really need this one that much. That one's red. We're going to go ahead and select all the red ones so we can skip over that. Kogla the Titan Ape. I think it's Kogla. Maybe it's Kogla. I have no idea. I like this one because in this deck you can have it attack immediately. In the other deck, in the Sidisi deck, it might not be that great. Although it does allow you to destroy a creature. When it enters, it gets to fight a creature. So if you can fight a big creature and it goes back to the graveyard, you can get it back from the graveyard again. So that's kind of cool. It just depends on if that's what you want to use here. But yeah, I don't think it's like amazing enough that we should really be suggesting adding it in. I think it's fine. It's not amazing. It's fine. Lord of the Void. This one's a janky card that I think is fantastic. Again, it requires haste. Otherwise, people just get rid of it right away. So that's one downside. Whereas Sepulchral Primordial, if opponents are milling, you get to get free creatures out of their graveyard. I don't know if this Sidisi deck will have a lot of milling opponents. I mean, we do have the Mesmeric Ore, but I don't want to have to rely on just that card for the Sepulchral Primordial to be good. So maybe that's not that great either. We've got the Terracodon and the Shieldred already in the deck. Vorinclex is a very mean card. I'm assuming that Jeff does not want to be adding mean cards into the deck, so I'm not going to suggest that one. Woodfall Primus. This one is one that, again, fits into that category of spot removal, of which we have plenty. However, the Apex Altasaur, this one's pretty interesting because it allows you to wipe away the board. Not a whole lot of effects in this deck. I think we don't actually have any board wipes in here besides the Living Death. So having that as an additional effect here, you can reanimate it and get rid of a ton of creatures from your opponent's battlefields. I think that actually is worth adding in. So Apex Altasaur is the first one I think I'd like to add in. Voidwinter, another mean effect. If you want to add that in, go ahead. Same thing with the Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. I think those are pretty good. Obviously, I have them in my Reanimator deck, but I'm going to not suggest them just because, Jeff, if you want to add them in, feel free to do that, but I don't think it's like going to make or break the deck in comparison to the other suggestions that I'm making here. I think the Apex Altasaur is definitely the best creature out of this deck that we can add in. Let me go ahead and scroll down to my Braids deck, and I'm going to go ahead and open that one up too. So if we open up that Braids deck, that will allow us to take a look at some other blue effects here. So blue creatures, and I do have some artifact creatures in the deck as well, so that's something we'll keep in mind for sure. Let's open up Braids, and let's see what else there's in here. So where's the big creatures? We actually don't have that here, do we? Oh, there it is. So we've got Arcanus, again, not, I think, super necessary for this deck, although that is card draw. You know what, let's do that. Let's open up Arcanus as well, so that way we can kind of knock out one of the card draw and get another fatty in the deck too. Same thing with the Consecrated Sphinx. I think both of those would be fantastic in a deck like this. Royal Elemental is not bad. It's not bad. You know what? I kind of like it. You get Theft. You get to steal opponent's creatures. Although I don't think Theft is as necessary here as it would be in my Braids deck. So let's go ahead and get past that one specifically. Whereas the Agent of Treachery, I do think this one's good. Because again, it doubles up as card draw. So that I think is going to be pretty nice. Now, I know I was mentioning earlier about using card draw in terms of getting it early on, but if we're playing a deck that's reanimating stuff, you can maybe mill something on turn 3, right? Reanimate it on turn 3, and then so let's say you have a 2-mana spell that like Grizzly Salvage on turn 2. Turn 3, you cast an Animate Dead, get back something that allows you to draw a bunch of cards. That should be pretty good. Now the Agent of Treachery, I don't know if this actually counts as card draw because we need to gain a bunch of things. But the fact that we've got a deck that those creatures are going to be dying, we can reanimate them again. I think Agent of Treachery eventually will get to the point where we're going to be drawing 3 cards every end step from that. So I don't have any issues with counting that as card draw. Let's keep going down, though, see what else we can find. Right now, we already found 3 effects here for card draw. What else do we have in here? You know what? I think I'm a little bit afraid about going, adding in too many fatties for the card draw options because when it comes to this style of effect, we don't want to be having only these big creatures for card draw. We want to have some cheap stuff too. So I'm going to leave up at least 2 slots. Let me see if anything will beat the Arcanus and the Consecrated Sphinx here. And before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and add in the Apex Altasaur because if not, I'm going to be worried I'm going to forget to add that one in. Altasaur. Apex Altasaur. And we'll add that one in as well here to the addition pile. That's a board wipe. That's a pretty important category. Don't get me wrong, but we didn't really see anything else. Actually, hold on a second. What does this Risen Executioner do? Yeah, it gives the other zombie creatures +1/+1. Okay, yeah, that seems pretty worth it here. All right, let's keep going through here, and let's see what else we can find. So if we can find something that draws cards better than Arcanus and Consecrated Sphinx, we'll add it in, but let's just take a look. Next thing we've got here is Nezahal. I'll be honest, this does draw more cards than Arcanus. So let's go ahead and add that one in. We'll add that one into the new pile and drop the Arcanus. I like that one and the Consecrated Sphinx. Those 2 cards here are pretty good. Nezahal and Consecrated Sphinx are both 2 cards I would love to reanimate. Sphinx Ambassador, don't get me wrong, I love cards like this, but sometimes you just gotta cut it off and draw yourself you put yourself at a specific spot. Now, Jin-Gitaxias, just like we talked about the Vorinclex in the previous for the previous deck, Jin-Gitaxias is another mean effect that kind of as a side effect of the amazing either card draw or ramp, you also shut down your opponents from doing a lot. So that's a little bit mean, and if you want to go for it, I say go for it, but that's not something that I think is going to be super necessary here. And then we've got the Ulamog, which shuffles itself in when we self-mill it, and same thing with the Blightsteel Colossus. So that's it for this deck. Yeah, I don't mind adding Nezahal and Consecrated Sphinx. I think those are 2 sources of having a big fat creature on the battlefield that also draws you cards. That is always a good effect, I think, to have. In terms of card draw that we can add into this deck, the two cards that I'm liking the most off the top of my head are going to be Skull Clamp, because Skull Clamp, you can put that on some of your creatures. Suddenly, either people don't attack you, or when they attack you, they give you two cards. So I think Skull Clamp would be a fantastic source here of card draw. You know, being able to pay 1 mana and draw 2 cards just from losing a token in combat, like that seems amazing to me. Not to mention if we get sack outlets in the deck, and again we have got like 3 or 4 of them here in this deck, we can actually use that with Skull Clamp and just lose those creatures when we want to. So that I think is going to be pretty important. The other card that I think would be pretty nice in a deck like this is going to be, I mean, we got the Pedantic Learning. That one's pretty cool. We can draw cards from doing a self-mill. You know, paying 1 to draw 1, that seems pretty good. But there are other effects here that will allow us to even draw even more cards. And obviously we've got Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study. Both of those are pretty well known. Maybe the Rhystic Study more so than the Mystic Remora. Let me go ahead and show you the Mystic Remora, though, if you haven't seen that one yet. That way, I'm going to leave that up to Jeff if you want to include that one. Mystic Remora here. It's got a cumulative upkeep, but it is the most played cumulative upkeep card in all of Commander. 1 mana for an enchantment, cumulative upkeep of 1. Whenever target opponent successfully casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4 mana. So usually people don't pay the 4 mana. I've never seen somebody pay the 4 mana after they cast a non-creature spell. So basically it's whenever anybody casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card. You just have to keep paying cumulatively the 1 mana at your upkeep. So if you want to include it, again, it's a famous card for a reason. It's, I think, very good. But I'm not going to suggest that here because I'm going to let that be up to you. If you want to include that one, go for it. If not, I think that's reasonable as well. And I think what I'd like to suggest here instead is the Pedantic Learning, because I think that is a pretty cool effect. People are not going to be seeing that very often. And, you know, I can tell sometimes when I look at a deck whether or not somebody wants to go for something a little bit more on the side of, I want to make sure that my deck is optimum and optimized for Commander. And when they're trying to go for, like, I want to play a game where my opponents have fun too. And I think one of the great ways to distinguish between those two types of players is, does that person have a Soul Ring in their deck? And we did not see a Soul Ring in Jeff's deck, and I think that was by design. Obviously, the number 1 most played card in Commander is not going to be missed by anybody. Nobody's going to forget about that one. So I think that's one reason why I think we can assume that maybe having a couple of more off-the-wayside inclusions will be better. That's why I didn't suggest those 2 Praetors from Jin-Gitaxias and Vorinclex. That's why I'm not going to be suggesting Soul Ring when we get to the optimum ramp. I'm not suggesting here Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora. Kind of the idea here is I'm not trying to make this deck exactly the same as every other deck, because that I think is what I'm inferring from what Jeff gave me here in this deck. So if I'm wrong, I apologize, but that's what I'm going to say. And at least I get to talk about these suggestions here at the same time. So it's not like I'm forcing Jeff to not use any of these cards. I'm just kind of picking out a few cards that I think are important and pretty cool. Now, Consecrated Sphinx, it used to be an effect like that, but I haven't seen that one in a very, very long time. So I think now Consecrated Sphinx, classifies as one of those off-the-wayside style effects too. All right, so we've got the card draw. Last section here is the ramp, and we really only need about 2 ramp for this deck. And I think what I like to do is start off with the strategy-independent options. And from the first moment that I'm looking at this, I would like to add in creatures if possible. Now, obviously, creatures that are used for, like, you get the creature out and it's a mana dork, that's one thing, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I like having the Burnished Heart and the Eryximethys. I think both of these 2 cards are pretty good. The Burnished Heart because you can use it over and over. You can get it out there, get 2 lands just from 1 effect. So even if somebody has a Rest in Peace, it's still good enough to give you 2 mana, which is what I have as the kind of the standard for my ramp. So Burnished Heart is good just at the baseline, but if you can reanimate it over and over, I mean, that gets you tons and tons of mana. Eryximethys is kind of interesting because when you mill it, it'll be a creature, but when you cast it, it'll actually be a land that produces blue and green. So I think that's kind of cool for those 2. So yeah, those are the 6 cards I would add in personally. Pedantic Learning, Skull Clamp, we'll go ahead and add those in first. So let's go ahead and add those in. Pedantic Learning. Yeah, this is another effect that, like I said, people don't play it all that much, even if they have a blue deck that is doing self-mill. And it's such a good card. When you're milling, you're going to be milling lands every now and then. That's just how it works, You're just going to be milling lands at some point. So with that, being able to pay 1 mana and draw a card per land that you milled, that is way more effective than the 2 mana cost would make it seem. Like, you get this down for 2 mana, and suddenly every time you mill a land, you can pay 1 to draw 1. That is pretty amazing. And then obviously the Skull Clamp. This is another card that I think is very well played. It is actually played in a higher percentage of possible decks than even Rhystic Study. So there's a little bit of give and take here as to whether Skull Clamp is a mainstream suggestion or if it's kind of off to the side. But I think Skull Clamp is just so good, we really can't afford not to be playing it in here. And it's not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you beat me, you had a Skull Clamp, that's the only reason you won. Nobody gets like that like they do with Rhystic Study, Soul Ring, other stuff like that. So I'm not super afraid of adding that one in. We're going to go ahead and get the Consecrated Sphinx and the Nezahal as well. Now, Nezahal is kind of interesting because it gives you a way to discard cards too, which I think is actually pretty important in a deck like this. If you've got those big fat creatures in your hand, you can discard them to Nezahal, and now you can use your oops, I misspelled that one. Now you can use your Reanimation to get them back for a lot less mana, which I think is a huge, huge effect in a deck like this. So we're going to go ahead and add in the Nezahal, and then lastly we're going to add in the Burnished Heart and the Arixmethes, and we're actually 1 up above where we want to be, and that's partly because we want to add in the Apex Altasaur. So that's why we're at 1 higher than what we wanted to add in. So we're going to look to see if we can find 1 more card to drop, and I'll take a look to see what I can get. Burnished Heart we're going to add in, and then lastly it's going to be the Arixmethes. This is a card, when I first saw it, I thought this was such a cool card, and I would love to play it myself, but yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. So Arixmethes, we can add that one in. So now the question is, where else can we drop a card? I think we don't want to drop anything from these 2 categories. Both of these 2 categories are very important. Same thing with the card draw and the ramp. I think both of those are important. We did talk about the sack outlets not being super necessary, but I think they're important enough that we can add in 2. That seems very reasonable for sure. Let's take a look here. Ramp we've got self-mill, that's pretty important. I'm looking at this Vizier. No, the Vizier is pretty good. Yeah, I like the Vizier. Muldrotha, Havengul Lich. I mean, this one's pretty cool because you can cast cards from other opponents' graveyards too, so that's pretty cool. I'm looking at the Skullwinder, and I'm thinking that maybe this one is one that we don't actually use because it does give an opponent the ability to return something that could potentially be actually a benefit, not a downside. But other than that, I'm not really sure what to drop. Like, I like everything else. I think everything else here is really good. Like I said, I don't want to be dropping ramp or card draw. And the sack outlets, yeah, I could be dropping the Carrion Feeder, but, which one would you want to drop? Would you drop the Carrion Feeder or the Skullwinder? I don't know. Skullwinder can get you back, like, Reanimation. Like, in a pinch, that could be the difference between winning the game and losing the game. So maybe that's what we want to do. Maybe we want to keep in the Skullwinder and take out the Carrion Feeder, but then we just only have, like, 2 sack outlets. And I think having 3 sack outlets is, it's reasonable. It's not like, oh my gosh, that is way too much. It's actually pretty reasonable to have that much in there. Man, this is a tough one. This is definitely a tough one. Yeah, we've got the ramp. We've got the spot removal. We've got the Hostage Taker, which allows us to steal that effect. So if we can keep, reusing it, it's actually pretty cool. I don't know here. This is a tough one. Do we drop one of our suggestions? I guess technically we could drop the Life and Death. Like, we don't need to reanimate that badly. We've got, I think, enough in this deck with the recursion that we've got. And I think but we're adding in creatures to reanimate. We really don't want to be going, a whole lot lower on what we're actually using for reanimation. I don't think we're going to go for that. We have to either drop 1 card from this effect, which I like all these cards here. I think all these cards are going to be important for this deck. We can't drop anything from really these 3 piles. And I would even say the recursion pile, or let's put it here. I think this pile is like the pile that's not worth getting rid of. And even this pile, I mean, it's a maybe compared to this one too. Man, it's a tough one. It is a tough one for sure. You know what? I'm going to go with my gut instinct and say that the Carrion Feeder is the card that can be dropped. Not so much because it's a bad one. Again, I talked about how we can use this to go lethal, which I think is pretty important. But I think the benefit here is that we can get this out and use that for sack outlets. So I think this is okay. We got these cards dropped from the deck, just 10 cards being dropped, and then 10 cards being added. And that's going to be the deck doctor here for Jeff Mobley's Sidisi Brood Tyrant deck. Now, one of the things I do want to say is thank you to all of you who are watching this video. So thank you especially to my patrons, especially Jeff Mobley. Thank you so much for supporting me. One of the cool things with Jeff Mobley, he joined in when I had that month where I was doing that special promotion where people at the $8 tier or higher get also a free deck layout image. And he was the only person who said, you know what, I actually want you to do a deck doctor, and then I want you to give me the image based on your deck doctor. Most people had like a separate deck, like, hey, this is my baby, I want a deck image for this one, but this one I'm not so sure about, so tell me what you can do with this one. Whereas I think Jeff Mobley, I think he really likes this deck, and he just wanted to see, what do I think about it? What could be improved in here? What might be some other effects that could be beneficial for this deck? So, not a ton, just 10 here. But yeah, he said, do the deck doctor, and then with the finalized deck, the cards that you're adding in, do the deck layout image with that one. So that's pretty cool. I think that, yeah, Jeff is definitely a cool guy. I'm looking forward to seeing what else he gives me for these future months. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Stay awesome, everybody.